I am going to talk about my favorite aspect of Catholic social teaching. This is what I think is missing in leftist political ideologies today. I think it's the most needed, and that is subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is twofold. It's the idea that whatever you can do for yourself, you should do. Then it's also sort of a switch in that if there's someone who you have authority over or in a higher status, have like a position of power over, you need to be able to help that person do more for themselves. The idea is to create the space and make sure they have access to their resources that they need, everything they need in order to accomplish this for themselves. A lot of times I think what we see in leftist politics is not enough emphasis on what can this person accomplish for themselves. Because for us as Catholics, God becoming man in Jesus universally elevated the human nature so that it could now cooperate with grace. So by grace of the incarnation, we are able to cooperate with the grace that Christ gives to us as a result of his paschal mystery. This means that all human beings, Christian or not, have the ability to cooperate with truth. This is actually what in Catholic theology confers on man his dignity. We are made in the image of God, the ability to love, the ability to cooperate with truth. And so this is where human dignity is located. So this means in politics, for the Catholic, this means that every single person, we must honor their dignity. This includes making sure they have access to the resources that they need or help them get out of difficult circumstances, or just really supporting them if they're disabled in some way and can't work. We need to have a sort of staggered, like layered authorities that can step in when the one beneath them cannot help themselves. Each authority has more power over the others, but that does not replace the power of those underneath them. It's not the job of the federal government to do what the family should do, right? That's up to us. The federal government does not replace what we can do. Like, our power coexists with everybody else's power, and it's really, you only step in when you need to. You don't come in and replace that power. So that's an important aspect of subsidiarity. Too often, I think in leftist politics, we need to make sure that we're honoring the dignity of others by expecting them to take on more responsibility over time for their own condition, and never expect the government to do something if you are able to do that for yourselves. And I think we really need to be emphasizing that in our politics if we truly care about social justice, because this is honoring the dignity of the people we're helping. And I think we also need to make sure that we are not absolving ourselves of our social responsibility by voting for the right policies, right? We have to make sure that we're in our communities working to help those directly in our communities. That is more important than any voting policy. You cannot outsource your social responsibilities to the system. Sometimes all we can really handle at a particular moment or a period of time is our own family. Like, sometimes that's all you can do because you're stretched thin on your job maybe, or you have so many kids that you have to take care of, or just your primary responsibilities are really, really hard and you can't do much socially. There's nothing wrong with that. That is part of knowing your own ability. I think it's also worth thinking of what options are there to show up in my community in the limited ways. It doesn't have to be, I think people sometimes overestimate how much time it actually takes or resources. It might not take as much time as you think. And a lot of times for me is that when I actually got involved in a community, then I actually had more help as well, because I was in the social sphere working with others that were working for others, and they were also willing to help me. So just something to keep in mind. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It might not require as much time as you think. Subsidiarity is hard for a few different reasons. One of those is that it's not efficient. So a lot of times it requires other people to do with difficulty what someone else helping them could do with ease. And so you have to make sure that you're creating a pocket of incentive in front of this person, that they can truly learn how to do this on their own, so that you are not locking them into this state of dependence. There's going to be struggle here, right? This is like watching your kids grow up and letting them learn how to put their shoes on. And you know how easy it is to just do that for them, but they need to learn how to do that for themselves. And that just, it requires effort, and it's difficult. It's hard to step back. And that requires having a strong sense of who you are actually, and where your ability and your responsibility ends, and where someone else's ability and responsibility begins. This really requires a strong sense of those boundaries, which is hard sometimes to identify. If so many people view themselves through the perspectives of other people, they actually don't know who they are, because they're constantly viewing themselves through the eyes of other people. And when you do that, it's really hard to separate your own responsibility from someone else's. And that's hard, because when you're helping someone, you want to make them happy. But so often you need to end it so that they can learn who they are, and that you can really be comfortable with saying no when it's outside of your ability or your responsibility. But really allowing that other person to say yes to their ability and their responsibility. Very, very important. I know this is really hard, and I actually did write a whole book on this. So it's called the Cognitive Resonance Workbook. I have a whole section on boundaries of when to start, when to stop, just in terms of subsidiarity in general. But I will include a download of a few pages so you can kind of get a sneak peek of what that looks like, and decide if you want to purchase it for yourself. Another thing that subsidiarity requires is a lot of communication. You need to be communicating with the people you're working with. You need to be asking them what they want. I've worked with immigration resettlement, and so many times we assume what we think the other person wants or needs, what we think would be best for them, and that's actually not what they want and not what they think is best for themselves. It's really up to that person. It requires so much communication, and really allowing that person to take the lead on their own lives, their own housing, their own things, right? Another thing I want to kind of get into is that social justice should not be making you self-congratulatory. If anything, social justice should make you very aware of the inadequacy of your own efforts, that anything you do is not enough to cover all the suffering in the world and all the injustice in the world. And it really becomes a lesson in staring in the face of suffering and learning to do what is just, because that aligns with what God has asked of you. God doesn't ask you to be effective. He doesn't ask your efforts to cover all of the suffering in the world, but he asks you to just act, to continue showing up in the face of that suffering. If you're not familiar, white saviorism is kind of this idea of where people in higher positions come in to save the day of these people that are suffering, kind of just in order to feel good about themselves, and end up not talking to the people that they're helping, and in many ways making it more difficult. And this especially happens like when countries go into other countries and they establish like technical aid, but long term it's not that effective, because they never talk to getting it in the hands of the community and really helping them find their own ways of dealing with those issues. So there are certainly times I think I'm not opposed to the government stepping in and helping other countries, but the idea is that you should be building something from the ground up with those communities in order for them to truly take over, versus just filling the gap and then pulling it and it collapses. The practice of subsidiarity would really help so many different areas of American life. I think it is sort of addressed in the economics sphere as distributism. What kind of capital can you take a hold of so that you're not dependent on an employer? You know, obviously most of us have employers, but there's something to be said for going to tech school, learning a trade, doing for yourself, owning your own business, whether that's a plumber, an electrician, all these trades. These are things that you can learn and to build your own businesses. In what way can you increase your own capital? And there's really no top-down approach to this, right? That's the whole point of what we're talking about, is that you need a lot of different people and doing as much as they can for themselves. When you need help, it should be available to you, but there should be some sort of incentive. Another aspect is in immigration resettlement. A lot of people who come to our country have not ever had freedom, real freedom. When you come from a country that doesn't have freedom, you don't know how to use it. Responsibility comes with that freedom. So it's something that needs to be learned, and that needs to be, I think, integrated into our resettlement programs, is a training in human freedom. Also, in terms of assistance and of any kind, how do our policies really honor the dignity of the people they're helping? In what way can we truly help them to do it for themselves? And there are some situations where that is just not going to happen. Sometimes you're just too elderly to be able to work. Maybe you have a diagnosis of some kind that really severely limits your ability to do much. And then we need to have those safeguards in place in order to help care for the vulnerable people. Not everyone is going to be able to get off government assistance, but it needs to be there, preferably at the most local level possible. When that does not happen privately, the government absolutely needs to be able to step in and do that. The role of the government here is to create the space for the people to be able to do what they can on their own. They protect their dignity and their freedom. Freedom always involves a level of discomfort. The responsibility that we hold is uncomfortable. We have to get familiar with that uncomfortable part of being human, the serious aspect of what it is to be free.